I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. What I'm about to share changed everything I thought I knew about family trust and the business my late husband and I spent 30 years building. My son texted me, "You're out of Sullivan Properties. Don't contact us. This is final." I stared at those words on my phone screen, read them once, twice, 3 times. My hands started shaking. For 30 seconds, maybe a minute, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Then something inside me clicked. That part of my brain that had managed crisis after crisis in the property business, the part that stayed calm when pipes burst at 2 in the morning or when tenants threatened lawsuits, that part took over. I typed one word back, "Okay." Then I opened my laptop and began locking every door they thought they could walk through. My name is Brooke Sullivan. I'm 60 years old, and I've spent 3 decades in the Indianapolis real estate business. My late husband Michael and I started Sullivan Properties from nothing, just a dream, a small duplex on the east side, and a willingness to work 7 days a week. We painted apartments on weekends. We learned to fix toilets and patch drywall because we couldn't afford contractors. Michael handled the acquisitions while I managed operations, and together we built something worth $850,000. Michael died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. In those final weeks when he could barely get out of bed, he taught me everything he hadn't already shown me about the business. How to evaluate properties, how to negotiate with sellers, how to read the market. "If something happens to me," he'd said, his voice weak but determined, "you need to know how everything works. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do this alone." I promised him I wouldn't. For 3 years after he died, I kept that promise. I ran Sullivan Properties by myself, making every major decision, signing every contract. Then last year, my son Frank started pushing to be more involved. He was 32, working in sales at a medical supply company, and he said he wanted to learn the family business. I was thrilled. I thought it meant he finally understood what his father and I had built. I thought he wanted to carry on Michael's legacy. I gave him access. I showed him how everything worked. I added him to accounts. I even gave him the key to my home office filing cabinet, the same key I'd given him years ago when Michael was sick and I needed help managing paperwork. And now on a Thursday afternoon in late February, sitting in my office in Fountain Square, I was reading a text message that told me I'd made a terrible mistake. The office was quiet. It was 4:15, and most of the property management team had already left for the day. I was alone, which turned out to be fortunate, because it meant no one saw my hands shaking as I pulled up the Sullivan Properties LLC portal on my laptop. First thing, changed the password. My fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The old password, Michael's birthday, was replaced with something Frank would never guess. Next, the signing authority. I pulled up the LLC member list and clicked on Frank's name. Revoked. Then Chloe's name, my daughter-in-law, though I had to force myself to even think those words now. Revoked. Every permission that had my name attached to it, I locked down. My phone rang. Frank. I let it go to voicemail. I picked up my desk phone and dialed Philip Gray, the commercial real estate broker who'd been helping us evaluate properties for the past 5 years. We'd been about to close on an 8-unit apartment building near Butler University. It was a good deal and I'd been excited about it. Not anymore. "Philip, this is Brooke Sullivan. I'm pulling out of the 8-unit purchase effective immediately. I'll send written confirmation within the hour." There was a pause on the other end. "Brooke, is everything all right?" "It will be." I hung up before he could ask anything else. Next call, Dennis Wright. He'd been my financial advisor for 20 years, since before Michael and I even owned our 3rd property. If anyone understood what I was protecting, it was Dennis. "Dennis, I need you to freeze any changes to my accounts. Nothing gets moved, nothing gets restructured, nothing gets signed without my physical presence and written authorization. Can you do that today?" "Of course, Brooke." His voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the question underneath. "Can you tell me what's happening?" "I will, just not right now. Right now I need to know that everything is locked down." "Consider it done. I'll send you confirmation within the hour." One more call. Troy Anderson, the younger financial advisor Frank had insisted we bring on 6 months ago. At the time, I thought it was a good idea, fresh perspective, new strategies. Now I understood exactly why Frank had wanted him there. I typed out an email instead of calling. I wanted it in writing. "Troy, effective immediately. All prior authorizations are revoked." Any and all transactions involving Sullivan Properties LLC or associated accounts require my direct written signature dated and witnessed. Do not process any requests that do not meet this requirement. I hit send, then opened a new document and started recording everything. Every password change, every phone call, every email, all with timestamps. If this was going to turn into a legal battle, and I had a feeling it would, I wanted documentation of every single action I took. By 4:15 it was done. Every door they'd thought they could walk through was locked, and I was the only one with the keys. My phone started ringing at 6 o'clock. First Frank, then Chloe, then Frank again. By the time I pulled into my driveway in the Butler-Tarkington neighborhood, my phone had rung 7 times. I walked into the house, set my phone on the kitchen counter, and watched it light up again. I didn't answer. The house felt too big, too quiet. It always did now without Michael. I stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Michael and I used to drink coffee together every morning, where we'd plan our day and talk about properties and dream about retirement. And I felt the weight of what had just happened settle over me. My son had tried to take my company. Not just the business, but everything Michael and I had built together. Everything we'd sacrificed for. Every late night, every weekend spent working every penny we'd saved and reinvested. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. There was a photo on the side table, Michael and me at the groundbreaking ceremony for our first major apartment complex. We were both in our 40s, then younger, hopeful, so in love. Michael had his arm around my shoulders, and we were both grinning at the camera like we'd just won the lottery. "I hope I'm doing this right," I said out loud to the empty room. The house didn't answer, but I could almost hear Michael's voice in my head. "You know exactly what you're doing. Trust yourself." At midnight, I turned off my phone without checking how many times it had rung. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a very long day. I woke up Friday morning to my phone vibrating against the nightstand. It buzzed in short bursts, over and over, like someone was desperately trying to reach me. I picked it up and turned on the screen. 46 missed calls. 21 from Frank. 15 from Chloe. 8 from numbers I didn't recognize. And 2 from Richard Morrison, the attorney who'd handled our LLC formation and every major legal document for Sullivan Properties. Those last 2 calls made my stomach drop. I scrolled through to the voicemails. Most of them I deleted without listening. I didn't need to hear Frank or Chloe's excuses or threats. But Richard's message I played. His voice was calm, but tight. "Brooke, this is Richard Morrison. We have a serious problem. Call me back immediately. Do not sign anything, do not agree to anything until we talk." I looked at the clock. 7:45. Richard's office opened at 8:30. I got dressed, made coffee, and at 8:15 exactly, I called him back. He answered on the first ring. "Can you be at my office in 30 minutes? I'll be there in 20. Richard Morrison's office was downtown in one of the older buildings near Monument Circle. I'd been there dozens of times over the years for the original LLC formation for property purchases for Michael's will. Richard had been our attorney since the beginning, and I trusted him completely. When I walked into his office at 8:45, he already had a folder open on his desk. I could see documents, forms, pages with signatures. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. Richard turned the folder toward me. "These were filed with the county clerk's office 2 days ago, Wednesday afternoon." I looked at the papers. LLC operating agreement amendments, membership transfer forms, signature pages. And there on multiple documents was a signature that was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. "I never signed those," I said quietly. "I know," Richard said. "Look at the capital S in Sullivan. The loop is wrong. The spacing is off. This isn't your signature, Brooke. Someone forged it." I stared at the signature line. He was right. It looked close enough that someone who didn't know my handwriting intimately might not notice. But I'd been signing my name for 60 years. I knew every loop, every curve. "Frank submitted these," Richard continued. "According to these documents, Chloe Patterson has been added as a managing member of Sullivan Properties LLC with full signing authority. The paperwork shows this was supposedly approved by you and executed on February 10th. February 10th. I looked up at him. "That's 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks before Frank sent me that text message." "Exactly. This was planned, Brooke. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. They spent at least 2 weeks preparing forged documents before they ever said a word to you." I sat back in the chair. My mind was racing, putting pieces together. February 10th. I tried to remember. What was I doing 2 weeks ago? I'd been working on the Butler University property deal. I'd had meetings with Philip Gray. I'd reviewed tenant applications for the Fountain Square building. And Frank had come by the house. I remembered now. He'd said he needed to pick up some old property files from my office. I'd given him the key years ago, so I just told him to go ahead while I was making dinner. How long had he been in there? 20 minutes, half an hour. There's more, Richard said. He picked up his office phone and dialed a number. I need you to hear this. The phone rang twice, then a familiar voice answered. Dennis Wright speaking. Dennis, this is Richard Morrison. I have Brooke Sullivan here with me on speaker. I need you to repeat what you told me yesterday. There was a pause. Then Dennis's voice came through quieter than usual. Brooke, I'm sorry I didn't tell you this sooner. I thought it was just, I don't know, family dynamics. But Frank and Chloe came to see me 3 months ago. November, I think it was. 3 months, November. 3 months. That was even earlier than I'd thought. They sat in my office, Dennis continued, and they told me you were starting to forget things, that your memory was declining. They said you were getting confused about business decisions, mixing up details, and they were worried about you managing the properties on your own. I felt something cold settle in my chest. And what did you say? I told them no. I told them I'd worked with you for 20 years, and I'd never seen any sign of memory problems. You're as sharp as you've ever been, Brooke. I told them if they wanted to make changes to your accounts, they needed to bring you to a meeting so we could discuss it together. Did they ever come back? No. After that conversation, I never heard from them again. Not until yesterday when I got your call to freeze the accounts. Richard ended the call. I sat there trying to process what I'd just heard. 3 months. They'd been planning this for 3 months. Spreading stories about my memory failing. Creating a narrative that I was incompetent, that I needed someone else to take over. Building a foundation so that when they made their move, people would believe them. And I'd been completely blind to it. I left Richard's office at 9:30 with a plan. He was going to file an emergency motion to void the forged documents and seek damages for fraud. But that would take time. Days, maybe weeks. In the meantime, I needed to find out how deep this conspiracy went. I drove to Massachusetts Avenue and parked near a coffee shop where I'd agreed to meet Howard Palmer. Howard and I had known each other for nearly 20 years through the Indiana Property Management Association. We served on committees together, attended the same conferences, referred clients to each other. If anyone in the local real estate community had heard rumors about me, Howard would know. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a latte. He stood up when he saw me, gave me a hug, and we sat down. How are you holding up? He asked. I heard Frank's taking a bigger role in the business. That must be such a relief for you. I set my coffee cup down carefully. What exactly did you hear, Howard? He looked confused. Just that you're stepping back a bit. Someone mentioned it at the association meeting Thursday night. Said you were transitioning some responsibilities to Frank that you wanted to focus more on. I don't know, personal time. After everything with Michael, it makes sense that you'd want to slow down. What else did they say? Howard shifted uncomfortably. Brooke, it's just talk. You know how people gossip. Howard, please. He sighed. Someone said your memory isn't what it used to be, that you've been having trouble keeping details straight. There was talk about whether it was safe for you to be managing properties on your own given some of the liability issues. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. But I told them that was nonsense. I've worked with you for years. You're as competent as anyone in this business. I pulled my hand back. Who said this, Howard? Who was talking about my memory at the meeting? I honestly don't remember. It was just going around. A few people mentioned it. I think someone said Frank had told them, or maybe Chloe. I'm sorry, Brooke. I should have called you right away. It's not your fault. But inside I was reeling. The rumor wasn't just with financial advisors. It had spread through my professional community. People I'd worked with for decades were hearing stories about my declining health, my failing memory, my voluntary retirement. And they were believing it. I left the coffee shop and sat in my car for a long time just thinking. They'd been thorough. They'd laid groundwork with Dennis. They'd filed forged documents with the county. They'd spread rumors through the business community. This wasn't amateur hour. This was a calculated campaign to make it look like I was voluntarily stepping aside because I was no longer capable, And if I hadn't caught it when I did, if I'd signed whatever documents they were planning to pressure me into signing, I would have lost everything. When I got home, I went straight to my office. The filing cabinet where I kept personal business documents, the one Frank had a key to, was in the corner. I'd given him that key 3 years ago when Michael was sick, and I needed help managing paperwork. I'd never asked for it back. I opened the cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Sullivan Properties Operating Documents. Inside were drafts, documents I'd never seen before, amendments with Chloe's name added as managing member, transfer forms that would shift majority control away from me, signature pages with my line marked pending in Frank's handwriting. There were notes, too, in the margins. Chloe's handwriting, I recognized it from birthday cards and Christmas notes. Things like make sure Mom signs this first, and need notary for this one, and get Dennis on board before proceeding. They'd been working on this in my own house, under my own roof, using the key I'd given Frank out of trust and love. I took photos of everything with my phone. Then I put the documents back exactly as I'd found them and closed the cabinet. My phone buzzed. A text message from Rachel Turner, my cousin on Michael's side. Rachel had always been observant, the kind of person who noticed things others missed. The message was short. You need to see what Chloe has been saying about you online. Call me. I called immediately. Rachel answered on the first ring. Brooke, thank God. I've been trying to figure out if I should tell you or if it would just make things worse. Tell me what. Chloe has been posting things on social media about you, about the family. She's calling you toxic. She's saying she's escaping financial abuse and controlling behavior. She's saying Frank has been trapped in a situation where his mother refuses to let him have any independence. Rachel's voice was tight with anger. People are believing her, Brooke. People who don't know you are commenting with support, telling her how brave she is. How long has this been going on? Since yesterday, right after you locked down the business accounts, I'm guessing. She's trying to control the story before you can tell anyone what really happened. I closed my eyes. Of course she was. This was a two-front war. Legal battle in the court's character assassination in public. By the time I could present my evidence, she'd have already convinced half the city that I was an abusive, controlling mother who'd driven my son away. Can you send me screenshots? I asked. Already done. Check your email. I thanked Rachel and hung up, then opened my laptop. Sure enough, there were 6 emails from Rachel, each containing screenshots of Facebook posts and Instagram stories from Chloe's accounts. The posts were carefully crafted. Emotional, but not hysterical. Sympathetic, but not weak. She talked about years of manipulation and finally finding the courage to set boundaries. She never mentioned specifics, no mention of the business, no mention of Sullivan Properties, just vague references to financial control and emotional abuse. And in the comments, dozens of people were supporting her. Friends, acquaintances, people I didn't recognize. All telling her how brave she was, how strong, how proud they were of her for standing up for herself. They had no idea they were supporting a lie. I sat there for a long time reading through the posts, feeling something harden in my chest. This wasn't just about the business anymore. This was about my reputation, my name. 30 years of building credibility in this community being destroyed one post at a time, and I couldn't fight both fronts at once. Not effectively. If I went public now, I'd just look defensive, like the controlling mother Chloe was painting me to be. No, I needed more evidence. Concrete, undeniable evidence that would make the truth impossible to ignore. Sunday morning, my phone rang. Not Frank or Chloe this time. The caller ID showed a name I barely recognized, Trevor Walsh. I answered. Hello. Mrs. Sullivan, this is Trevor Walsh. I work with Frank. I'm the assistant property manager. I think you need to know what's been happening. I sat down slowly. Trevor. I remembered him now. Frank had hired him about 3 years ago to help with day-to-day operations. Young, maybe 28, competent with repairs and tenant issues. I'd met him a handful of times, but never worked with him directly. Go ahead, Trevor. His voice was quiet, like he was afraid someone might hear him. I've been worried about Frank for months now, since maybe November. He's been different, stressed. And Chloe, Mrs. Sullivan, she shows up at the office constantly, every single day. She sits in on meetings with contractors. She makes decisions about which properties to prioritize, how to handle tenant complaints, what vendors to use. And Frank he goes along with it. He doesn't seem like himself anymore. How long has this been going on? It started slow in November, but by January it was every day. She'd tell him exactly what to say in phone calls. She'd review his emails before he sent them. She even started answering the office phone, sometimes introducing herself as part of the management team. He paused. I don't think this is what you intended when you brought Frank into the business. No, I said quietly. It's not. I'm sorry to bother you with this. I just thought you should know. Frank's a good guy, but he's not the person I used to work with. It's like she's running everything and he's just there to sign papers. I thanked Trevor and told him I appreciated his honesty. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about my son, about how Chloe had slowly taken control, about how I hadn't seen it happening because I was so happy that Frank wanted to be involved in the family business. How had I missed this Monday morning at 8:20? I received a forwarded email from Philip Gray, the commercial real estate broker. The subject line was simple. You need to see this. The email was from Chloe, sent Friday afternoon, the day after I'd locked down all the accounts. It was addressed to Philip and 3 other brokers we worked with regularly. Dear Philip, I am writing to inform you that Brooke Sullivan is experiencing early-stage memory issues and is no longer capable of managing complex transactions. For all future Sullivan Properties business, please contact Frank Sullivan and myself directly. We have full authority to proceed without Brooke's involvement. Thank you for your understanding during this transition. Chloe Patterson, Sullivan Properties, LLC. I read it 3 times. She'd put it in writing. Not just rumors, not just whispers at community meetings. An official email to business partners claiming I was mentally incompetent. Philip's note at the top of the forward was brief, Brooke. I received this Friday. I've paused all current discussions until I hear directly from you. Professional ethics require verification. Please confirm your status immediately. I sat down at my computer and typed a response copying Richard Morrison, Dennis Wright, and Troy Anderson. Philip, I have no memory issues whatsoever. I am fully mentally competent and in complete control of Sullivan Properties, LLC. The 8-unit transaction is permanently canceled due to unauthorized attempts to proceed without my consent. Any claims to the contrary are false and defamatory. I am copying my attorney and financial advisors on this correspondence to ensure complete documentation. Brooke Sullivan, I hit send. Within an hour, I had responses from all 3. Richard used the word actionable. Dennis used the word fraudulent. Troy apologized profusely for ever believing their story. By Monday afternoon, I had professional witnesses. I had written evidence of defamation. I had a pattern that couldn't be explained away as simple misunderstanding. But I still didn't know one crucial thing. Why? Why push this hard? Why move this fast? Why risk everything on forged signatures and false claims about my mental state? Frank had access to the business. He was learning operations. He could have waited for me to retire naturally in a few years. This level of aggression didn't make sense unless there was something else, something I wasn't seeing yet. I was about to find out. Monday morning at 10:45, Richard Morrison called back. This time his voice was different, quieter, like he'd just discovered something he wished he hadn't. Brooke, sit down. I was standing in my kitchen. I sat down at the table. While I was searching court records for the forged LLC documents, I found something else. Something separate. He paused. Chloe hired a divorce attorney, Patricia Turner and Associates downtown. They're divorce specialists. I stared at the kitchen table, the same table where Michael and I used to have coffee every morning, where Frank used to do his homework when he was little. When, I asked? February 10th. The room went very quiet. Say that again. February 10th. The same day the forged LLC documents were filed. Chloe paid a $7,500 retainer to Patricia Turner's firm from an account that only has her name on it. No joint account with Frank. She kept this completely separate. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the February sun was weak and cold. She was planning to leave him, before they even tried to take the company. That's what it looks like, Richard said. And Brooke, I need you to understand what this means under Indiana law. Business assets acquired during marriage are subject to equitable division in a divorce. If Chloe helped Frank take control of Sullivan Properties, and then she divorced him, she could claim 40 to 50% of its value. I did the math. $850,000. 40 to 50%. $340,000 to $425,000. She was going to help him steal from me, I said slowly, and then steal from him. Yes. I stood there looking out at the street, my mind working through the implications. Frank had betrayed me for her. He'd forged my signature. He'd spread lies about my mental competence. He'd tried to take everything Michael and I had built. And the woman he'd done it all for was planning to take half of it and walk away. Frank was a fool. He was guilty of everything: the forgery, the lies, the betrayal. But he was also being used. Part of me wanted to call him right then to warn him. But another part, the part that had been running a business for 30 years, the part that knew how to think strategically, wanted him to see it exactly the way I was going to show him. Richard, I said, don't tell anyone about the divorce filing yet. Not Dennis, not Troy, no one. What are you thinking? I want to arrange a meeting. Wednesday evening, 6 o'clock at my house. Frank, Chloe, and you as my attorney. I'm going to lay everything out at once. Every lie, every forged document, every piece of evidence. I paused. And then at the end, I'm going to put those divorce papers on the table and let Frank see exactly what he destroyed his relationship with his mother for. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Wednesday at 6. I'll be there. The letter went out Monday afternoon. Certified mail, legal language, a formal demand for appearance. Cease all false statements regarding my mental competence. Retract all communications sent to business partners and professional contacts. Appear Wednesday, February 28th at 6:00 p.m. with legal counsel present at my residence. Failure to comply will result in formal litigation for defamation, fraud, and attempted theft of business assets. I signed it. Richard mailed it. Then we waited. Tuesday morning at 10:30, I was in my home office when I saw Frank's car pull up outside. He sat there with the engine running. February was still cold, and I could see his silhouette through the windshield, see the exhaust rising in white clouds behind the car. He sat there for 22 minutes. I watched from the window. He never touched the door handle. He never got out. He just sat there staring at the house where he'd grown up, where his father had died, where his mother still lived. Finally, he started the car and drove away. I never went outside. At 3:45 that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Frank. We need to talk before Wednesday. This is getting out of control. Let's work this out. I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I typed my response. You told me not to contact you. I respected that. If you want to talk Wednesday at 6 p.m. with Richard present. Not before. I hit send. He didn't reply. Wednesday arrived cold and gray. I spent the morning at Richard's office reviewing documents one final time. Every forged signature. Every false statement to business partners. Every piece of the timeline showing premeditation. And at the bottom of the stack, Patricia Turner's divorce retainer agreement. February 10th, $7,500 from Chloe's separate account. At 5:30, I drove home to Butler Tarkington. The house was quiet. I walked through rooms where Michael and I had lived our entire married life together. The kitchen where we'd made coffee every morning. The living room where we'd watched the evening news and talked about our day. The dining room where we'd raised our son. At 5:50, I cleared the dining table. The folder in the center. 2 chairs on the opposite side. Richard's chair to my right. 4 water glasses. Nothing else. The table where we used to eat Sunday dinners together when Frank was a boy. Now it looked like a courtroom. Richard arrived at 5:55. He set his briefcase down and reviewed the documents one final time. We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to say. Everything would be said in the next hour. At 6:02, I heard a car in the driveway. 2 minutes late. A small power play. Probably Chloe's idea. Frank knocked on the door. I opened it. No greeting, no handshake. Just 4 words. Come in. Sit down. Chloe walked in first. That's what I remember most clearly about that moment. Not Frank, my son, the child I'd raised in this house, but her. She entered my home like she was walking into a business meeting she'd already won. Head high, shoulders back. She wore a black blazer that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, and her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with sharp, confident strikes. She sat down in the chair directly across from me and met my eyes without flinching. No nervousness, no guilt, just cold, calculated composure. Frank came in behind her. He looked different than the last time I'd seen him. Thinner. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were hunched forward like he was carrying something heavy. He wouldn't look at me. Not once. He walked to the chair next to Chloe and sat down, his eyes fixed on the table. Richard took his seat to my right. He opened his briefcase without a word, pulled out a legal pad and pen, and positioned them carefully in front of him, ready to document everything. The four of us sat there in silence. My dining room, the room where Michael and I had celebrated Frank's birthdays, where we'd had Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings, had become something else entirely. A courtroom. A battleground. I looked at Frank one last time. Really looked at him. My son. The baby I'd brought home from the hospital 32 years ago. The little boy who used to sit at this table doing math homework while I made dinner. The teenager who'd helped his father and me paint apartments on weekends. The young man who'd stood next to me at Michael's funeral and promised he'd help me keep the business going. 40 years of being a mother. 30 years of building a business. 3 years since Michael died and left me to navigate this world without his wisdom. All of it had led to this moment. I opened the folder. 4 days ago, I began, my voice steady. You sent me a text message. You told me I was out of Sullivan Properties. You told me not to contact you anymore. I trusted you, Frank. I brought you into this business because I wanted you to have what your father and I built, and you tried to take it from me. Frank opened his mouth to speak. I held up one hand. You'll have your turn. Right now, you listen. His mouth closed. I pulled the first document from the folder, the LLC amendment with Chloe's name added as managing member. I slid it across the table. This was filed with the county clerk's office on February 10th, 2 weeks before you sent me that text message. I pointed to the signature line. That signature is supposed to be mine, but it's not. Look at the capital S. Look at the spacing between the letters. Someone forged my signature on a legal document. That's fraud, Frank. That's a felony. I watched his face. He looked at the signature, then at me. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. No denial, no explanation. I'll take your silence as confirmation, I said. I pulled the next document. My notes from the conversation with Dennis Wright. 3 months ago, November, you and Chloe went to see Dennis Wright, my financial advisor, the man who's managed my accounts for 20 years. I read from my notes. You told him I was having memory problems. You said I was getting confused about business decisions, mixing up details. You asked him to help you move assets into your names. Frank's face went pale. Dennis refused. He told you he'd worked with me for 2 decades and never seen any sign of cognitive decline. He told you that if you wanted to make changes to my accounts, you needed to bring me to a meeting so we could discuss it together. I looked up from the notes. You never came back, because I wasn't having memory problems. You were lying. Mom, Frank started. I'm not finished. I pulled out the financial summary. 30 years of growth. Properties acquired, mortgages, paid off, equity built. $850,000. Your father and I built this from nothing. We started with a duplex on the east side that needed so much work the bank almost didn't approve our loan. We spent every weekend for 6 months fixing that building. Your father worked construction jobs during the day and came home to repair drywall and install fixtures at night. I managed the books, screened tenants, collected rent. My voice caught. Your father, Frank, this business was his as much as mine. Every property, every tenant, every dollar we earned. Frank's eyes were wet now, but I wasn't finished. 3 years after he died, you tried to erase his legacy. You tried to take what he built and put someone else's name on it. I gestured toward Chloe. Someone who never knew him. Someone who never worked a day in this business. Someone who... That's not fair, Chloe interrupted, her voice sharp. I turned to look at her. You'll get your turn. Right now you sit there and listen. Something flickered in her eyes. Anger, maybe. Or surprise that I'd spoken to her that way. But she closed her mouth. I pulled out the email Philip Gray had forwarded to me. Chloe's email. On Friday, the day after I locked down the accounts, you sent this email to Philip Gray and 3 other real estate brokers I've worked with for years. I read aloud, Brooke Sullivan is experiencing early-stage memory issues and is no longer capable of managing complex transactions. For all future Sullivan Properties business, please contact Frank Sullivan and myself directly. I set the paper down and looked at Chloe. You put it in writing. Written defamation of character sent to my professional contacts. You claimed I was mentally incompetent. I leaned forward. I have no memory issues, Chloe. I am fully capable of managing complex transactions. I've been doing it successfully for 30 years, but you needed people to believe I was incompetent, didn't you? Because that was the only way your plan would work. For the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. Just a small one, a tightness around her mouth. And it wasn't just the brokers, I continued. You spread rumors through the Indiana Property Management Association. You told people I was voluntarily stepping back because my memory was failing. People I've worked with for decades started asking me about my retirement, about my health. You destroyed my professional reputation in a matter of weeks. I pulled out the screenshots Rachel had sent me, the social media posts. And then when I locked you out of the accounts, you went public. Facebook posts about escaping financial abuse. Instagram stories about setting boundaries with toxic family members. Carefully worded, nothing specific, but designed to make everyone think I was an abusive, controlling mother. I spread the screenshots across the table. You wanted to control the narrative before I could tell anyone what really happened. The room was silent except for the sound of Richard's pen moving across his legal pad, documenting every word. Trevor Walsh called me, I said. Your assistant property manager. He told me you've been showing up at the office every day since January, sitting in on meetings, making decisions about properties, vendors, tenant issues. He said Frank doesn't seem like himself anymore, that you're running everything and Frank just goes along with it. I looked at Frank. He was staring at his hands, his jaw clenched. So let me tell you what I think happened, I said. I think this plan started in November. That's when you first went to Dennis, when Trevor first noticed changes in Frank's behavior, when the rumors started spreading through the business community. You spent 3 months building a foundation, getting people used to the idea that I was declining, that I needed help, that Frank was naturally stepping into a leadership role. I pulled out the forged documents I'd found in my filing cabinet, the drafts with notes in Chloe's handwriting. On February 10th, you filed forged documents with the county clerk. You'd been working on these in my own house, in my office, using the key I gave Frank 3 years ago when his father was sick. I pointed to Chloe's handwriting in the margins. Your notes. Make sure Mom signs this first. Need notary for this one. Get Dennis on board before proceeding. Frank's head came up. He looked at the documents, then at Chloe. You were working on these in Mom's house. We needed somewhere with all the original paperwork, Chloe said, her voice tight. You were using my key, Frank said slowly. The one she gave me to help when Dad was dying. You were using that to... Frank, don't, Chloe said. But something had shifted in his face, a crack in his certainty. I pressed forward. February 10th through February 24th. 2 weeks of spreading the final round of rumors, making sure everyone knew I was incompetent. And then last Thursday, Frank sent me the text message, the one telling me I was out, not to contact anyone, that it was final. I looked at my son. You thought I'd just accept it. You thought I was too old, too tired, too grief-stricken over your father to fight back. You thought you could walk through every door without resistance. Mom, if you'd just... But I did fight back. Within 2 hours, I'd locked down every account, revoked every authorization, canceled every pending transaction. By Friday morning, you couldn't access anything. I paused. That's when you started calling, 46 times, because you realized I wasn't the helpless old woman you thought I was. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Richard set down his pen. Mrs. Sullivan, may I interject? I nodded. He looked at Frank and Chloe. Everything Mrs. Sullivan has described constitutes fraud, forgery, defamation, and attempted theft. The forged signatures alone are punishable by up to 3 years in prison under Indiana law. The defamation, particularly the written statements to business associates, is actionable both criminally and civilly. And the conspiracy to deprive Mrs. Sullivan of her property rights opens you both to significant damages. Frank's face had gone from pale to gray. We prepared all of this documentation, Richard continued, gesturing to the folder, because we wanted you to understand the severity of what you've done before we proceed. You have attempted to steal a business worth $850,000 from a woman who built it over 30 years. You have damaged her professional reputation. You have caused her emotional distress. The legal consequences will be substantial. Unless, I said quietly, you sign a complete relinquishment of all claims to Sullivan Properties and agree to pay restitution for the damage you've caused. Frank was shaking his head. Mom, please, if you'd just listen. Chloe was trying to help. She said you needed someone to... Frank, I said, and my voice was harder now. Stop. Just stop. I know you think she was trying to help you. I know you think this was about protecting the business or protecting me or whatever story she told you. But there's something else you need to know. I reached into the folder one last time. My hand closed around the yellow envelope at the bottom of the stack. The one Richard had given me Monday morning. This was it. The moment everything would become clear. I pulled out the envelope and held it for a long moment looking at my son. Then I slid it across the table to him. Before we go any further, I said, there's one more thing you should know about your wife. Frank stared at the envelope. It was sealed, official-looking, with the letterhead of Patricia Turner and Associates visible through the translucent paper. What is this? He asked. Open it. His hands were shaking as he picked up the envelope. He glanced at Chloe, but she was staring straight ahead, her face completely blank. He tore open the envelope and pulled out the papers inside. I watched his face as he read. Watched confusion turn to comprehension, turn to horror. His lips moved slightly as he read the words. Marital dissolution. Initial consultation. Retainer agreement. $7,500. He looked at the date at the top of the page. Then he read it again like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. February 10th, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's right, I said. February 10th. The same day the forged LLC documents were filed. The same day this whole plan went into motion. Chloe hired a divorce attorney, Frank. She paid a $7,500 retainer from an account that only has her name on it. No joint account. She kept it completely separate. Frank turned slowly to look at his wife. Chloe. What is this? She said nothing. Her face was like stone. She was planning to leave you, I said quietly. Before you ever sent me that text message, before you ever tried to take the company, she had already hired a lawyer to end your marriage. That's not... Frank started, then stopped. He looked at the papers again. This can't be real. It's real, Richard said. I verified it with the court records myself. But why? Frank's voice was rising now. Why would you... I answered for her. Under Indiana law, business assets acquired during marriage are subject to equitable division in a divorce. If you had succeeded in taking Sullivan Properties from me, Chloe could have filed for divorce and claimed 40 to 50% of its value. That's between $340,000 and $425,000, Frank. The color drained from his face completely. That was her plan. I continued, my voice steady even though my heart was breaking for him. Help you steal from me, then steal from you. You would have ended up with nothing. No business, no wife, no relationship with your mother, nothing. Frank stood up abruptly, the papers crumpled in his fist. His voice when he spoke was barely recognizable. I destroyed my relationship with my mother for you. He was shaking now, his whole body trembling with rage or grief, or both. I forged documents. His voice cracked. I lied to people who trusted me. I spread rumors about my own mother's mental health. I tried to take everything she built with my father. He slammed his fist down on the table. The water glasses jumped. I did all of that for you, and you were planning to divorce me the whole time. Chloe sat perfectly still. Her face hadn't changed. No guilt, no shame, not even anger. Just that same cold, blank expression. The silence stretched out. Frank stood there breathing hard, the papers crushed in his hand. I sat across from him watching my son go through every stage of grief in the span of minutes. Denial, anger, bargaining with himself. Now he was somewhere between rage and complete devastation. And then, without any change in her expression, Chloe spoke. I'm done here. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she was discussing the weather or commenting on traffic. She picked up her purse from the floor beside her chair and stood up slowly, deliberately. Frank looked up at her, his eyes red and wet. Chloe, she looked down at him. Still no emotion on her face. What? Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you weren't planning to... She let the silence stretch. Let him sit there waiting for an explanation, a denial, anything. Then she smiled. It was a small smile, cold and sharp. Did I love you, Frank? She paused. No, not once. Frank's face went white. Were you easy? She tilted her head slightly. Pathetically so. I felt something twist in my chest. I'd expected her to defend herself, to make excuses, to try to salvage the situation. I hadn't expected this. This casual cruelty, this complete lack of remorse. She turned to look at me. You almost won, Mrs. Sullivan. Her smile widened just a fraction. Almost. Then she walked to the door. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor, sharp final sounds. She opened the door without looking back. I heard her car door open, heard the engine start, and then she was gone. The silence lasted 15 seconds, maybe 20. It felt like an hour. Frank sat there staring at the spot where Chloe had been standing. I sat across from him, staring at the door she'd just walked through. Richard sat beside me, his pen still poised over his legal pad, frozen in the act of documenting what had just happened. Finally, Richard spoke. His voice was quiet, professional. I have documented everything that was said here tonight. Every statement, every admission. I can testify to all of it if needed. I nodded slowly. Then I looked at my son. He was still holding the divorce papers, now crumpled and damp from his sweating palms. His shoulders were shaking. He wasn't crying, not quite, but he was close. Richard will draft the documents, I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking under the table. You'll sign a complete relinquishment of all claims to Sullivan Properties, LLC. You'll agree to stop making any false statements about my competence. You'll retract any communications you've sent to business partners. And you'll cooperate fully with any legal proceedings related to the forged documents. Frank didn't look up. And if I don't, then we file fraud charges by Friday. Criminal charges. You'll be arrested, Frank. You'll go to trial, and with the evidence we have, you'll be convicted. I'll sign, he whispered. I stood up, started toward the door. Mom, I stopped but didn't turn around. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought she... I don't want to hear it, Frank. My voice was harder than I'd meant it to be, but I couldn't help it. Couldn't soften it. You chose this. You sent that text message. You forged my signature. You spread lies about my mental health to my professional colleagues. You tried to take what your father and I built together. I turned slightly so he could see my profile. I'm sorry she used you. I'm sorry you were foolish enough to let her. But her cruelty doesn't erase your guilt. It just makes you a fool as well as a thief. I heard him make a sound, a sob or a gasp, I couldn't tell. Richard will contact you about the signing, I said. He said. Don't come back to this house. I walked outside. The February night was cold and my breath came out in white clouds. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, not starting the engine. Through the dining room window, I could see Frank still sitting at the table, his head in his hands. Richard was packing up his briefcase, organizing papers with calm efficiency. I started the engine and drove away. Frank didn't call, didn't text, didn't try to explain or apologize again. The following Monday, Richard called me at 9 in the morning. It's done. Frank signed everything this morning. No arguments, no negotiations, no conditions. Sullivan Properties is yours completely, legally, permanently. Thank you, Richard. I hung up and sat in my office, the home office where Frank had worked on those forged documents, where he'd betrayed everything his father and I had built. The business was mine. The properties were secure. Everything I'd built with Michael was protected. But victory didn't feel the way I'd thought it would. There was no triumph, no satisfaction. Just exhaustion. Just the hollow feeling of having survived something terrible. I'd won, but I'd also lost my son. I sat there for a long time thinking about Michael, about what he would say if he were here. Would he be proud of me for protecting our legacy? Or would he be disappointed that I'd let it get this far, that I hadn't seen what was happening until it was almost too late? I did what I had to do, I said aloud to the empty room. I protected what we built. That's what you would have wanted. Isn't it? The room didn't answer. Outside my window, Indianapolis was waking up to another gray March morning. Life was going on. The world was moving forward. And I was still here, still standing, still fighting. That would have to be enough. 2 weeks passed. 14 days since that confrontation at my dining room table. 14 days since Chloe walked out with those cold words hanging in the air. 14 days since I'd told my son not to come back to this house. I should have felt relief. I should have felt victorious. The business was secure. The legal documents were signed, and Frank had relinquished all claims to Sullivan Properties. Richard had filed the paperwork with the county clerk, and the forged amendments had been officially voided. My name, my sole name, was back on every document where it belonged. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, Every morning I woke up in the same house where I'd raised Frank, where Michael and I had celebrated birthdays and holidays, where we'd built a family. And every morning I walked past Frank's old bedroom, now a guest room, but still containing traces of his childhood. A baseball trophy on the shelf. A framed photo of him and Michael at a Colts game. Small reminders of the son I'd lost. Not lost to death. That would have been easier in a way. At least then I could grieve cleanly without this complicated tangle of anger and love and disappointment. No, I'd lost Frank to his own choices. And that was somehow worse. I threw myself into work. It was easier than thinking, easier than feeling. On the Monday morning after the signing, I drove to the Fountain Square building, one of our oldest properties, a 6-unit apartment building that Michael and I had purchased 15 years ago. There was a leaky faucet in Unit 3 that needed attention, and rather than call a plumber, I decided to fix it myself. Michael had taught me how to do basic repairs during those early years when we couldn't afford to hire help. "If something happens to me," he'd said one Saturday afternoon while we were replacing a toilet in our first duplex, "you need to know how everything works. You can't rely on contractors for every little thing. It'll eat up all your profit." I'd learned. I'd watched him work, asked questions, practiced until my hands knew what to do. And after he died, those skills had become more than practical. They'd become a way to stay connected to him. Every time I fixed a pipe or replaced a washer, I could hear his voice in my head, patient and encouraging. The tenant in Unit 3 was a young woman named Sarah. She was a nursing student at IUPUI, working part-time at a coffee shop to pay her rent. When I knocked on her door that Monday morning with my toolbox, she looked surprised. "Mrs. Sullivan, I thought you were sending a plumber." "I can handle it," I said. "May I come in?" She stepped aside and I went to work on the kitchen faucet. It was a simple fix, a worn-out O-ring that needed replacing. 10 minutes and it was done. Sarah brought me a glass of water while I was cleaning up. "Thank you," she said. "Most landlords wouldn't come out personally for something like this. They'd just send someone and add it to the rent." "My husband and I always believed in staying connected to the work," I told her. "These aren't just investment properties to us. They're homes. People live here. That matters." She smiled. "That's really nice. You don't see that much anymore." After I finished, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time looking at the building. Michael and I had been so proud when we bought this place. It had been our biggest purchase at the time, and we'd celebrated by bringing Frank here to see it. He was 17 then, about to start his senior year of high school. We'd walked him through each unit, talking about our plans, our dreams for expansion. Someday, Michael had set his arm around Frank's shoulders. "This will all be yours. You'll carry on what your mother and I started." Frank had nodded, but I remembered now that he hadn't seemed particularly interested. He'd been more focused on his phone, on his friends, on his own teenage life. The business had been his parents' thing, not his. When had that changed? When had he started wanting the business? Or had Chloe planted that desire in him, nurtured it, shaped it into something she could use? I started the car and drove home, those questions circling in my mind. By the end of that first week, I'd started hearing things. Indianapolis isn't a small town, but the real estate community is tight-knit. Word travels fast. Rachel called me on Friday evening. "Brooke, I thought you should know. Chloe left town." I was making dinner, just a simple pasta dish, cooking for one. "Where did she go?" "No one knows for sure. Someone said Texas, maybe Austin or Dallas. Someone else heard Florida. But she's gone. Packed up and left sometime over the weekend." "What about the divorce?" "From what I heard, it was finalized quickly. Emergency filing or something. Frank didn't contest it." Rachel paused. "She didn't get anything. There wasn't anything to get. The business was never his, so there were no assets to divide." I stirred the pasta, watching the water boil. Chloe had gambled everything on a plan that fell apart. Now she was gone, moved on to her next target, her next scheme. I hoped whoever she found next would be smarter than my son, would see through her faster. But I didn't feel satisfaction at her failure. I just felt tired. "How's Frank?" I asked, even though I'd told myself I wouldn't. "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "I haven't seen him. But Brooke, people are talking. They know something happened. They know Chloe's gone and that Frank isn't working at Sullivan Properties anymore. They're asking questions." "Let them talk," I said. "The truth will come out eventually." But after I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, pasta forgotten, and wondered what the truth even was anymore. That my son had tried to steal from me, that his wife had manipulated him, that I'd chosen the business over my own child. All of those things were true, and none of them told the whole story. 3 weeks after the signing on a Tuesday afternoon, Frank showed up at my office. Not at my home. At the Sullivan Properties office in Fountain Square, the one where he used to work, where Trevor Walsh still managed day-to-day operations. I'd been there reviewing lease agreements when Marcy, our office administrator, knocked on my door. "Mrs. Sullivan, Frank is here. He's asking to see you." My first instinct was to say no, to have Marcy tell him I was busy, that he should leave. But something stopped me. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the small, stubborn part of me that was still his mother, despite everything. "Send him in." Frank walked into my office holding a folder. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. I could see it in his face and the way his shirt hung loose on his shoulders. The dark circles under his eyes were worse than they'd been at the confrontation. His hair needed cutting. He stood in the doorway, not quite entering, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. "Hi, Mom." "Frank." We looked at each other across the space of my office. This room where he used to sit and ask me questions about property management, where we'd reviewed tenant applications together, where I'd been so happy to have him interested in the family business. "Can I come in?" he asked. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down carefully, like he was afraid the chair might break. He set the folder on his lap, both hands gripping it. "I know you said not to come to the house," he began, "so I came here. I hope that's okay." "What do you want, Frank?" He flinched at the coldness in my voice. "I wanted to show you something. I've been working on a business plan. It's for a property management consulting service. I'd help small landlords with tenant relations, maintenance, scheduling, that kind of thing." He held up the folder. "I spent the last 3 weeks putting this together. It's good, Mom, really good. I learned a lot working with you, and I think I could make this work." He opened the folder and started to pull out papers. "I just need some startup capital. Not much. $25,000. Enough to cover licensing fees, insurance, basic marketing. I could pay you back within 2 years with interest. I have projections here." "No." The word came out flat, final. Frank stopped mid-sentence. "Mom, if you'd just look at the plan." "No. Please, just look at it. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I leaned back in my chair and looked at my son. Really looked at him. At the desperation in his eyes. At the folder he was clutching like a lifeline. "Frank," I said quietly, "if your business plan is solid, if your projections are realistic, if your model makes sense, then you'll be able to find investors. Other investors. People who will look at your plan objectively and decide whether it's worth their money. But I came to you because you know me. You know I'm good at this work. I know that 3 weeks ago you forged my signature on legal documents. I know that you spread lies about my mental competence to my professional colleagues. I know that you tried to steal a business your father and I spent 30 years building." I kept my voice level, emotionless. Why would I invest in someone who's proven himself to be dishonest and disloyal? I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I've spent every day since that night thinking about what I did, how badly I screwed up. Chloe manipulated me, but that doesn't excuse— "No," I interrupted. "It doesn't, and that's exactly my point. You made your choices, Frank. You chose to believe her over me. You chose to forge documents rather than have an honest conversation. You chose to betray your own mother for a woman who was using you. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His voice was breaking now. "But I'm trying to move forward. I'm trying to build something of my own to prove that I've learned from this. If you just give me a chance—" "No." Frank stared at me. Tears were running down his face now, and part of me, the mother part, the part that had rocked him to sleep when he was a baby and held his hand on his first day of school, wanted to reach across the desk and comfort him. But the businesswoman in me, the part that had survived 30 years in real estate, knew better. "If your plan is solid, you'll find other investors," I repeated. "If it's not, then you'll understand why I said no. I'm not your safety net anymore, Frank. You cut that line yourself." I turned back to the lease agreements on my desk, picked up my pen. A clear dismissal. Behind me, I heard Frank stand up, heard the rustle of papers as he put them back in the folder, heard his footsteps cross to the door. "I love you, Mom." His voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I didn't turn around, didn't respond, just kept my eyes on the document in front of me even though the words were blurring together. The door closed softly. I sat there for a long time after he left, staring at the lease agreement without seeing it. My hands were shaking. There was a tight knot in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I'd done the right thing. I knew I had. Giving Frank money would just be enabling him, teaching him that there were no real consequences for his actions, that he could betray me and still come back for more. But knowing I'd done the right thing didn't make it HRT any less. Spring came slowly to Indianapolis that year. March was cold and wet with gray skies that seemed to press down on everything. I worked. I managed properties. I met with contractors and tenants and real estate brokers. I kept busy, and I tried not to think about Frank. But the city is only so big. Eventually, I started hearing things. Howard Palmer called me in early April. "Brooke, I thought you should know. I saw Frank last week. He's working at the Starbucks on Mass Ave, behind the counter." I thanked Howard and hung up. Then I sat in my living room processing that information. Frank, who'd gone to Indiana University, who'd had a decent job in medical supply sales, who'd been learning to run a property management company worth nearly $1 million, was working at Starbucks, making coffee, taking orders. 2 days later, Rachel called. I saw him doing delivery driving. He was getting into a car with one of those DoorDash stickers. "Brooke, he looked—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I made myself not care. Made myself focus on the business, on the properties, on anything except the image of my son delivering food orders in his beat-up Toyota. But at night alone in the house, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop wondering if he had enough to eat, if he could afford his rent, if he was safe. Then I'd remember what he'd done. Remember the forged signatures, the lies, the betrayal. Remember that text message, "You're out of Sullivan Properties. Don't contact us. This is final." And I'd remind myself that he'd made his choices, that I'd made mine, that this was the consequence of his actions, but reminding myself didn't make it easier. In May, 3 months after the confrontation, I closed on the 8-unit apartment building near Butler University. The same building I'd been about to purchase when Frank sent that text message. The same deal I'd canceled in the immediate aftermath of his betrayal. Philip Gray had called me in late March. "Brooke, the 8-unit building is back on the market. The previous buyer fell through. Are you interested in revisiting?" I'd thought about it for a week. Looked at the numbers. Reviewed the property inspection reports. Calculated potential rental income and maintenance costs. It was still a good deal. Maybe even better than before the seller had lowered the price slightly after the first buyer backed out. "Let's do it," I told Philip. The closing was on a Tuesday morning in mid-May. I sat at the title company's conference table and signed my name over and over. Purchase agreement, loan documents, title transfer. My name, Brooke Sullivan, on every line. No co-signers, no partners. Just me. I owned it 100%. Outright. After the closing, I drove to the building. It was a beautiful spring day, warm and sunny, the kind of weather that makes you remember why you love the Midwest, despite the brutal winters. The Bradford pear trees along the street were in full bloom, white blossoms against blue sky. I walked through the building slowly, room by room. It needed work, painting some updated fixtures, new carpet in a few units. But the bones were good. Solid construction from the 1920s. High ceilings, original hardwood floors in some rooms. Character. Michael would have loved this place. I sat down on the front steps of the building and pulled out my phone. For a moment, I just looked at it. Then I opened my photos and scrolled back to an old picture. Michael and me 20 years ago, standing in front of our third property. Both of us grinning, covered in paint from spending the weekend renovating. Young and hopeful, and so in love. "We did it, Michael," I said aloud, even though there was no one to hear me. "We talked about buying a place like this. Somewhere close to the university where we could rent to students and young professionals. Somewhere with good bones and growth potential. The street was quiet except for birdsong and distant traffic. We never got the chance together. But I'm doing it now. I'm still doing the work we planned." My voice caught. "I hope you're proud. I hope I'm making the right decisions." A breeze rustled through the pear trees, sending white petals drifting across the lawn like snow. I sat there for a long time, holding my phone, looking at that old photo, thinking about everything Michael and I had built, everything we'd survived, everything we'd dreamed of doing, and thinking about Frank. Did he know I'd bought this building? Did he care? Was he somewhere in Indianapolis right now delivering food orders or making lattes, thinking about the business he'd tried to steal? Or had he moved on, forgotten about Sullivan Properties entirely? I didn't know. And I told myself I didn't want to know. But sitting there on those front steps, looking at Michael's face in that photo, I couldn't help wondering what he would say about all of this. Would he tell me I was too hard on Frank? Or would he support my decision to protect the business Michael had loved Frank fiercely? He'd been a good father, patient, involved, always making time despite the demands of the business. When Frank was little, Michael used to take him to Colts games every season. They'd come home sunburned and hoarse from cheering, and Frank would talk for days about the plays they'd seen. What would Michael tell Frank now if he were here? What would he tell me I didn't have answers? All I had was this building, this business, this life. I was still figuring out how to live without him. I stood up, brushed off my pants, and went back to work. Summer came. June melted into July, and Indianapolis turned hot and humid. I hired a professional property management company to handle day-to-day operations for the 8-unit building. I couldn't do everything myself anymore. I was 60 years old, and the business was getting too big for one person to manage alone. Trevor Walsh stayed on as assistant manager for my other properties. He was good at the work, reliable and honest. After everything with Frank, I valued honesty above almost anything else. In late July, I had lunch with Dennis Wright. We met at a restaurant downtown, and over salads, we talked about retirement planning. "Brooke," Dennis said carefully, "have you thought about what happens to Sullivan Properties if something happens to you? Do you have a succession plan?" I'd been avoiding this question for months. "I'm only 60, Dennis. I'm not planning on dying anytime soon." "I know, but plans like this take time. And after everything that happened with Frank." He trailed off delicately. "You mean after my son tried to steal my company?" "Yes, that. I just want to make sure you're protected, that the business goes where you want it to go." I set down my fork. "I've been thinking about that. I'd like you to serve as financial successor if anything happens to me. You'd work with Richard Morrison to execute my will. The properties would be sold and the proceeds would be divided among specific charities. Organizations that help women in business, scholarship funds for first-generation college students, that kind of thing." Dennis nodded slowly. "Not to Frank." "No, not to Frank." We sat in silence for a moment. "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" Dennis asked. "I already have," I said, and I meant it. Somewhere over the past few months, the sharp edge of anger had dulled. I wasn't furious anymore, just sad. Just tired. "Forgiveness doesn't mean trust," I continued. "It doesn't mean we have a relationship. It means I've stopped letting his choices define my life. I've stopped being angry. But that doesn't mean I'm going to hand him my business or my money or my trust again." "That's fair," Dennis said. "That's more than fair, actually." But as I drove home that afternoon, I wondered if it was fair, or if I was just justifying my own stubbornness, my own inability to reach out to my son to offer him another chance. The truth was, I didn't know what fair looked like anymore. I just knew what I could live with. And giving Frank another opportunity to hurt me, to take what Michael and I had built, wasn't something I could live with. So I didn't. August brought storms. Big Midwestern thunderstorms that rolled across the flatlands and turned the sky green and sent everyone running for basements. I was at home one Thursday afternoon when the tornado sirens started wailing. I grabbed my phone and my purse and headed for the basement. The old house's basement was unfinished, just concrete floors and exposed beams and boxes of storage I'd been meaning to sort through for years. I sat on the bottom step listening to the storm rage overhead. Wind howled. Rain hammered against the house. Somewhere upstairs, something crashed a tree branch against a window, maybe, or patio furniture blown across the yard. And sitting there in the dark basement, waiting for the storm to pass, I thought about Frank again. Was he somewhere safe? Did he have a basement in whatever apartment he was living in? Was he scared? He'd been afraid of storms when he was little. Michael used to sit with him during bad weather, telling him stories to distract him from the thunder. They'd count the seconds between lightning and thunder, turning it into a game. "See," Michael would say, "the storm's moving away. We're safe." I wondered if Frank remembered that, if he thought about his father during storms. The tornado sirens stopped after 20 minutes. The wind died down. I went upstairs and found tree branches scattered across the yard and a small crack in one of the living room windows, but otherwise the house was fine. I stood in the living room looking at the crack in the window, and suddenly I was crying. Not just tearing up, but really crying. Sobbing so hard I had to sit down on the couch because my legs wouldn't hold me. I missed Michael. I missed him so much it physically hurt. I missed having someone to talk to about all of this. Someone who would understand the weight of the decisions I'd made. Someone who would tell me I was doing the right thing, or tell me I was being too hard on Frank, or just hold me while I cried. I missed my son, not the man who'd forged documents and spread lies, but the boy who used to do homework at the kitchen table, the teenager who'd helped paint apartments on weekends, the young man who'd stood beside me at his father's funeral. I missed having a family. And sitting there on my couch in my empty house with a cracked window and storm debris in the yard, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. If protecting the business meant I'd lost something more important. But I didn't know how to fix it. Didn't know if it could be fixed. So I just sat there and cried until I had no tears left. September, 6 months since that text message. 6 months since Frank had tried to take Sullivan Properties. 6 months since I'd locked him out of every account and set this whole chain of events in motion. I was at the Fountain Square building on a Saturday morning checking on some repair work when I saw him. Frank. He was across the street coming out of a grocery store with 2 bags. He looked different, thinner still, but also somehow healthier, like he'd been sleeping better. His hair was shorter, neatly cut. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, nothing fancy but clean and presentable. He didn't see me. He loaded the groceries into his car, the same old Toyota, and drove away. I stood there on the sidewalk watching his car disappear around the corner and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. I'd already forgiven him, but something else. A lessening of the weight I'd been carrying. He was surviving, maybe even doing okay. I went back to work. That evening I called Rachel. "Have you seen Frank recently?" "A few times. Why? How does he seem better than he did a few months ago?" "I heard he's working 2 jobs now, still at Starbucks, but also doing some freelance property management consulting on the side. Small landlords, people with just a few units. Nothing that competes with Sullivan Properties." So he'd started that business plan after all. Without my money. Without my help. On his own. I felt something like pride, just a flicker of it before I pushed it away. "Has he asked about me?" I asked Rachel. "Not to me. But Brooke, I think he's respecting your boundaries. You told him not to contact you, and he hasn't. He's not showing up at your house or your office. He's not calling or texting. He's staying away like you asked." After I hung up, I sat in my living room and thought about that. Frank was respecting my boundaries, doing what I'd asked him to do, giving me space. Was that what I wanted? I didn't know anymore. October brought cool weather and changing leaves. The city turned gold and red and orange, beautiful in the way Midwestern autumns always are. I spent my 60th birthday alone by choice. I didn't want a party or a celebration. Just a quiet day, a nice dinner I made for myself, and an evening spent looking through old photos. Photos of Michael. Photos of Frank as a baby, a toddler, a child, a teenager. Photos of the 3 of us together, a family. Happy. Whole. I wondered what Frank was doing for my birthday. If he remembered. If he was thinking about me the way I was thinking about him. My phone stayed silent all day. No text, no call, no card in the mail. He was respecting my boundaries. That night I wrote him a letter. I didn't know if I'd ever send it, but I needed to write it. Needed to get the words out. "Dear Frank, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About the choices you made and the choices I made. About forgiveness and consequences and what it means to be a family. I forgive you. I need you to know that. I forgave you months ago even though I was too angry to say it out loud. What you did was wrong, but I understand that Chloe manipulated you. I understand that you were foolish rather than malicious. But forgiveness doesn't mean I trust you. It doesn't mean I'm willing to let you back into my life or my business. Trust is earned over years and destroyed in seconds. You destroyed my trust in you, and I don't know if it can be rebuilt. I heard you started a consulting business. I'm glad. You're smart and capable and you learned a lot about property management. I hope you succeed. Truly. But I can't be part of that success. I can't be your investor or your mentor or your safety net. You have to do this on your own the way your father and I did. The way every entrepreneur does. Through hard work and sacrifice and risk. Maybe someday we'll be able to have a relationship again. I don't know. Right now, I'm focused on protecting what your father and I built, on honoring his memory, on making sure Sullivan Properties continues to thrive. I hope you understand. Mom. I folded the letter and put it in an envelope, wrote Frank's name on the front. Then I put it in a drawer and didn't send it. Maybe someday I would. But not yet. November. The holidays were approaching and I was dreading them. Thanksgiving without Michael. Thanksgiving without Frank. Just me alone in this big house with nothing but memories and regrets for company. Rachel invited me to her house for Thanksgiving dinner, but I declined. I wasn't ready to sit at someone else's table to watch other people's families to pretend I was okay. Instead, I volunteered at a community center that served Thanksgiving dinner to homeless and low-income residents. I spent the day helping serve food cleaning tables, talking to people who had even less than I did. People who'd lost more than a business or a son. People who'd lost everything. It helped. Not completely, but enough. On my way home that evening, I drove past the house where Frank was living. I'd gotten the address from Rachel, not because I planned to visit, but just so I'd know. So I could picture where he was. It was a small apartment complex on the east side. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe. His car was in the parking lot. Lights were on in one of the second-floor units. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, looking up at those lit windows. Was Frank alone for Thanksgiving too? Or did he have friends, a girlfriend, someone to share the holiday with? I wanted to know. But not enough to knock on his door. I drove home. December came, and with it snow. Indianapolis turned white and quiet Christmas lights appearing on houses throughout Butler-Tarkington. I put up a small tree in my living room more out of habit than enthusiasm. Michael had always loved Christmas, and it felt wrong not to mark the season somehow. I was decorating the tree on a Saturday afternoon when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment I thought about not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door. Frank stood on my front porch holding a small wrapped package. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with the ribbon on the package. "Hi, Mom." We stared at each other. I hadn't seen him this close since that day in my office when he'd asked for money, 4 months ago. "I know you said not to come to the house," he said quickly, "and I'm sorry for showing up uninvited. But it's Christmas and I wanted to give you this. And then I'll leave, I promise." He held out the package. I took it slowly. It was light, small enough to fit in my palm. "You don't have to open it now," Frank said. "I just wanted you to have it, to know that I'm thinking about you, that I miss you." His voice cracked on the last word. "Okay," I said. We stood there in awkward silence. Snow was starting to fall, light flakes drifting down from a gray sky. "How are you doing?" I asked, and was surprised by my own question. "I'm okay. Working a lot. The consulting business is growing slowly, but it's growing. I'm making enough to pay rent and buy groceries. I'm doing okay." "Good. That's good." More silence. "I should go," Frank said. "I don't want to violate your boundaries. I just wanted to see you, to give you that gift." He turned to leave, started down the porch steps. "Frank." He stopped, turned back. "Thank you for respecting my space these past months, for not calling or showing up. That was the right thing to do." He nodded. "I'm trying to do the right things now, even when they're hard." Then he walked to his car, got in, and drove away. I stood on the porch holding the small package, watching his taillights disappear down the street. Snow was falling harder now, beginning to stick to the ground. I went inside and sat on the couch. The half-decorated Christmas tree blinked colored lights in the corner. I looked at the package in my hands, then carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a small wooden box, handmade. On the lid, someone had carved Sullivan Properties, and underneath it 3 dates: the year Michael and I bought our first duplex, the year we incorporated as an LLC, and the year Michael died. I opened the box. Inside, on a bed of velvet, was a key. Not a real key, a decorative one, bronze with intricate scrollwork. There was a note tucked under the key, written in Frank's handwriting. "Mom, I made this box myself. Took a woodworking class at the community center. Thought you might like to keep something special in it. The key is symbolic. You taught me that success isn't about who holds the keys, but about who earned the right to hold them. You earned every key to Sullivan Properties. You and Dad built something incredible, and I had no right to try to take it from you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. And I'm trying every day to be better than the person I was. I love you. Frank. I sat there for a long time holding the box, reading the note over and over. The Christmas tree lights blinked on and off. Snow fell outside my window. And for the first time in 9 months, I felt something like hope. Not reconciliation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But hope that maybe someday we could find our way back to something. Not what we had before that was gone broken beyond repair. But something new. Something different. Something built on honesty instead of manipulation. On respect instead of entitlement. On earned trust instead of assumed family obligation. I put the box on the mantel next to the photo of Michael and me at our first property. Then I went back to decorating the tree. Outside, Indianapolis turned white under falling snow. Inside, I was finally beginning to heal. People ask me if I'll ever let Frank back into my life. Back into the business. Back into my heart. I tell them the truth, I don't know. What I do know is this. Forgiveness doesn't mean trust. It means I've stopped letting his choices control my life. Trust without boundaries is just an invitation for harm to walk through your door. You can love your family and still refuse to be taken advantage of. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no to the person you love most. I protected what Michael and I built. I set boundaries. I enforced consequences. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. And if my story helps one person recognize manipulation, set boundaries, protect what they've worked for, then maybe everything I went through was worth it. The business is thriving. Sullivan Properties is growing. I've bought 2 more buildings since that 8-unit near Butler University. I'm thinking about hiring a full-time operations manager, someone to help Trevor with the day-to-day work. I'm 60 years old and I'm running a successful real estate business by myself. Not bad for an incompetent old woman with memory problems. As for Frank, I think about him every day. Wonder how he's doing. Hope he's learning and growing and becoming the man his father would want him to be. But I'm not his safety net anymore. I'm not his backup plan. I'm his mother. And mothers don't just love. They also teach. And sometimes the hardest lesson to teach is that actions have consequences. Even especially for the people we love most. Spring will come again. It always does in Indianapolis. The snow will melt, flowers will bloom, and life will go on. I'll keep managing my properties. Keep honoring Michael's memory. Keep building the legacy we started together. And maybe someday if Frank truly proves himself, there might be a place for him in that legacy again. But not today. Today I'm standing on my own. Strong, successful, surviving. And that's enough.